All right. All right, this is a quick mic check here for YouTube. We are officially live. We are loading right now. So, hello. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Mike Carlo from PowerBI.Tips. We're doing a webinar today with Daniel Marsh-Patrick around the HTML content custom visual for Power BI. If you haven't heard about this visual, you will be very much impressed. It's going to be awesome. I'm giddy with excitement to see this thing in action. I'm really, really excited about this. So let me bring Daniel in here with you, and we'll transition. And let's do a quick audio check for us together. So, Daniel, welcome to the show. I appreciate it.
Hello.
Uh, do uh,
How you doing?
just give me a real high level, a brief introduction on you, and then we'll get into your presentation.
Oh, right. Yep. So I'm Daniel. I am a little MVP down here in sunny old New Zealand. It's a lovely sunny morning down here. I have been working with Power BI for a really long time. I am very, very enamored with visualization and storytelling in Power BI. So most of my work is around seeing what I can do with custom visuals or visuals in general, and just seeing what we can do with it. And I guess I'm here to talk about my latest little project.
Yes, and you have lots of projects, by the way. So let me kick it over here to your screen share, and we'll get you going on that as well. So,
Sure.
all right, you are good to go. Screen share is happening.
Awesome. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. So there's some contact information here. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, Power BI community. I'm also a super user on there, and I do a lot of assistance with the development forum and helping people about building custom visuals. Got an email and a website. I do most of my work under a little consulting company down here that I've set up called Coachovo, and we specialize mostly in just building visualization and doing bespoke Power BI work for people. I also am partnered with a company called Discovery AI in Australia, who PowerBI.Tips should be friends of. So if you know Alice Drummond, she's an MVP. I work with her and Christian, who is also one of the co-founders of Discovery AI. So I help them out with their projects and ventures to much success and fun. In terms of what I do, I've done this stuff. So I think the visual is a little more famous than I am, which I'm fine with, by the way, because I don't enjoy that too much. But if you've seen the violin plot on PowerBI.com, that's one of mine. That's in AppSource, and it was recently an editor's pick, which I was quite excited about. The one next to it is the small multiple line chart, which is my first custom visual I learned how to do because I got a little frustrated with developing small multiples in Power BI. If you're familiar with those, and you'll know what I'm about with that one. The other thing I really enjoy is playing around with Charticulator. So I got a couple of examples here, and if you know PowerBI.Tips, hopefully you know Charticulator. They host a version, and it's a lot of fun to play around with the idea of conceptualizing visuals and seeing what we can do with data. So I got a few little examples here. What I'm here to talk about today is the HTML content visual.
All these things you're talking about make me incredibly excited. You've got tons of bandwidth. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, zoom in there. Make sure and I put your email, your website. Your website is in the YouTube chat window, so I put that out there as well for people to get a hold of you.
Yeah, I don't do much.
And you're open for business, right? So you do full-on custom to visuals. So anything that I get that comes across my plate that is custom visuals, I definitely refer Daniel in this space. He's quite an expert, very forward-thinking in the code and how things are being manipulated. So he's very closely tied with a lot of the Microsoft team as well. So again, the expertise is there. He's really, really good at what his stuff is. So if you have any custom visual needs or you know anyone who does, please reach out. Send him an email, get a hold of him on his website, or hit him up on LinkedIn. He'd be more than happy to make this the full-time, all I do is build visuals all day, every day kind of job. So that'd be awesome if you could help him out there as well.
Thank you very much. They're pretty tricky just to manage expectations, but they're a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And there's always some interesting challenges that come through.
All right, we're back on your screen share.
Lovely. Okay. So do we want to kick things off?
Sure, go ahead. Jump in.
Excellent. Yep. So the HTML content visual came around. Well, it's actually an appropriation of an old custom visual called HTML Viewer. So if those of you remember back when custom visuals started to come out, HTML Viewer was one of the first ones that came out, and it was a way of being able to put content inside Power BI that was HTML, which we'll talk about in just a sec. So with the HTML Viewer, you could drag columns into a into the visual, and Power BI would try and render it. Hadn't really had any updates for a long time, and then recently it mysteriously disappeared. So no one really knows why, but it just disappeared. And a lot of people relied on it for some stuff they'd done, and people like David Eldersveld were really cool in helping people understand how they might be able to rip that out of old reports so they could still continue to use it. But I had some discussions with actually my friends at Discovery AI about how they were using it. They've got some videos on and tutorials on how they were using it to embed videos for their reports. And they were sharing some frustration in not being able to just load it straight in. So I thought, well, it's probably not that hard. So I had a look at what it was kind of doing from a kind of clean room perspective. I could kind of see what you put in and what you got out. And I thought, oh, we'll have a go at that. So we got that together, got something working pretty quickly. And then I started to wonder what else could be done with it. And I looked at a few videos where people provided feedback and sort of said, oh, it'd be good if it could do measures, or, there's a couple of things it didn't quite do, like open hyperlinks or various other things. So I thought, well, before I put it out, maybe I can just do a couple extra tweaks. So we're going to talk about that, show you a few examples, give you some ideas. The goal of the visual is to really give you ideas. It's not necessarily for me to tell you exactly what you need to do with it. It's more about giving you a tool that you can use to try and create content. So whatever I can do, I'm sure you can do better, but we'll see how we go. So the challenge with HTML is it's a web-based technology, and it's very tricky to gauge the level of expertise in the BI domain. So BI is obviously becoming more and more convergent with the web and other technologies. A lot of people use APIs to scrape data and so on and so forth. You use the internet, you've used Power BI, you'll have seen HTML even if you don't necessarily appreciate what it is. So HTML it's a semantic language for the web. It is not really a programming language. It's a way of marking up web pages with elements that tell a browser how to display that information. So we have a little visual here, which is, hopefully that's pretty clear, but I'll just zoom in just to be sure. So this has some bullet points, and at the bottom here, whoops, still remembering how to use zoom in.
No worries. I do the same thing.
We've got some, every little word here is doing a different thing. So what that actually looks like underneath, and this is where people start to sort of yawn a bit and go, oh, okay, maybe that's not for me, but it's not too tricky to figure out. What you sort of learn about it, I think there are things called tags. So if we zoom in here, that heading that you see there, it uses an H2, which is a heading level 2 tag. If the horizontal rule tag puts a little line, the UL is an unordered list.
So real quick here, just
quick
to ask a couple of questions around this one, because so you see, so point out there, H2 is the header portion, so that you're basically wrapping what you want the header to be in more of a there's it's like a start and an end too, right? So I know here's where the header is going to begin, and then the backslash, and then the other H2 you're saying is the end point of no more header. We're going to do something else.
That's right. So think of a tag as an enclosing box. Yep. So the H2 tag on the left here is where we start a header. This is the text that goes inside the header, and then this closes it off. One like this, really trying to bone up on my hotkeys really fast so I don't keep zooming in and out. This one here is a tag that just does one thing. Yes. So it opens and closes a tag at the same time. A horizontal rule, which we can see just here, all it really does is it's a ruler.
Witness line.
So it doesn't really need to do anything else. The formatting doesn't really show it too well, but a unordered list encloses many of these little LIs, and we can see here there's the closing one. Perfect. So in here we've got an LI, which is a line item. We've got a little bullet point in there, and the closing line item, then a new one, and that's building these little bullet points here.
Yeah, makes sense.
What I might do is just pull up the DAX for this, just so that we can, it's a little more friendly.
Oh, look at this. So yeah, this is way better. Yeah, cool.
So this is my, be cool if DAX formatter did this, but it doesn't. So I kind of manually crafted this in. But what we can sort of see here is, here's the heading, here's the horizontal rule, and I like to just to make everything lay out nicely.
This is great.
So there's list items, and then we've got a bold, we've got an italic, we've got an underline, small. We have span, which denotes a little area that we can do things with. So what I've done is I've applied a red color to it and then closed that off. Subscript, superscript, code, which is like monospace, and mark, which let me just clear that off because that one's not so obvious. That puts a little highlight.
Ah, okay.
So what we've done here is we've written some DAX. I'm going to call this DAX in HTML. It's a term. I don't know. We'll maybe stick with it. I don't know. Maybe it's a thing. Who
I
knows?
like it. Let's coin it right now.
And then
This is DAX and
the visual itself, DAX in HTML.
Dimensional.
HTML in DAX, actually. Let's flip it around. HTML in
We'll
DAX.
work it out.
Jeez. It's still too early. The visual itself allows you to debug. So this is the DAX measure that we've dragged in just here. And we can actually convert the output to show us the raw HTML. So this is the custom visual. And so is this one.
So really,
the difference
really
being
quick, how do you get the custom visual in there real quick, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that's an incredibly good question and one I should have probably let out with. So when we get custom visuals in Power BI, if your organization allows it, we can click the ellipsis in the visual palette, get more visuals. And this one's easy to find because it's an editor's pick this week, which is awesome. So hopefully that window is going to come up. My Power BI desktop always seems to slow down a bit when Teams is doing stuff with it. So this is
cross your fingers here. Hang on, Power BI.
Maybe he's showing me to cut through some post-production to speed this dialogue
up. Exactly.
I'm going to take a little drink of water while this is happening.
And while you're taking a drink, I can also fill in some gap there. There's actually multiple ways you can go get your custom visuals. So some of the custom visuals come directly from a file that you can download. So you can upload a single file, or you can go to the marketplace, which I'll also throw in a little link for that as well. You can go to the Microsoft, I think it's App Source, correct?
It is, yeah. It's got a number of names. It's the marketplace inside Power BI.
Okay.
But everything kind of Office 365 related is published on what they call App Source. So that, there it is. It's finally coming up. I think we won't do this much today.
Exactly.
Editor's pictures at the top.
There we go.
So we have, I do actually do a presentation that goes into getting and sharing visuals in much more detail because there's the concept of organizational visuals. But for now, we'll stick with, App Source. And we have a visual called HTML content. Thank you, 5-star reviewers. What we can do is we can click add. So I already have the visual in my report, but I would just click add. It's going to pop it in the pane there. The other thing we can do with HTML, yes, it does exist. We won't worry about that, but that's the workflow you would follow. We can do a few other things, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. But we can do things like embed images and create hyperlinks. So this is from the very prolific PowerBI.Memes who have an Instagram account, but they post on Reddit every Monday. It's always fun to look forward to that.
Oh, those are great.
And we could do heaps of stuff. So let's just show that one up as well. This one's a little bit simpler. So we can use things called image tags, IMG. Let me just zoom in there. And an IMG denotes an image. And an anchor link. Oops, I've really got to get better at zoom in. Don't use it enough.
Take your time. Feel free getting comfortable with it.
Is what we call a hyperlink. So we create a URL, and that's what appears here. So we just display PowerBI.Memes, but we can click on this. And hyperlinking we'll talk about in a minute. But Power BI will, with custom visuals, prompt to say you're being navigated away. But if you ever want to, if you're that obsessed with Power BI.Memes is always worth a visit.
Definitely. So
hopefully that's we've got an Edge browser here with this lovely page full of delicious Power BI memes. Anyway.
Delicious. I like it. Good descriptor.
Delicious. Spicy
memes.
I
like it. Spicy memes.
So what we're going to do today is, because HTML is a very, very broad subject, so I can't teach you everything. So I'm going to kind of start simple and go really hard. But it's really to give you a taste of where we could possibly go with it. And also just to give you some ideas. So we're back into kind of Power BI normal land now. So what I have is I have a data model, very simple, simple star schema. So this is the financial data set that you could just pull from PowerBI.com when they get samples. What I've done is I've been good and I've turned it into a star schema. So I have my table of financials, which is basically the sales information, and then I've got some dimensions for the date. So good old date table, a product dimension, and a demographic dimension where I've kind of got country code and a few other things. So if we go back here, is that table coming through okay, Mike, or does it need zooming?
It's fine. It's good for now.
Yep. Okay. So what we've done is we've got a country and we've got a short code. And obviously, because we have raw context, we've got a measure called sales. So if I just open up my financials, and sales is we'll just pull up the DAX here. It's just a very simple sum measure. So, typical Power BI in the table, we've got country code, and sales. So we can just visualize our data. And we've got a total. So what we want to do is do something a little more rich with that. So, tables are nice. They're very informative, but we're going to use the visual to produce a little bit more content. So one thing we can do is, I like this idea of making flags for a country. Hopefully we know our flags, but we can start with an icon. So we can, we'll start with the country code. And one thing we can do is, I'm going to use calculated columns as well. I do apologize for this up front for some of the modeling diehards. I know calculated columns really should be minimized,
Okay.
but it's just to stop jumping around from Power Query
Exactly.
to the modeling view and vice versa. So what I can do though is, if I have a country code, there's a nice little site called countryflags.io, which let me just zoom in there. We can create HTML, and what we can do is, this is an API, so we can pass in a URL, and we can pass in a country code and a style and a size. So we can pass in little properties to make a flag. So we can see here, we're passing in Belgium, it's flat, and it's 64 pixels. So what we get here is this guy here. So what we can do is we can think about binding our data into something like a column, and then putting a column into the visual to give us some richer output. So what I've got down here is in the demographic table. Just going to pull this up. Bear with me. I've already prepared this because we're doing it live.
Yes, we are.
So I've created a column here called country flag 24 pixels, and what we've got is, hopefully, let's just start drawing. So what we've done is we've got some DAX. Oh, that is the wrong shape. Control key. We've got a text value here. And what we're doing is we're building the first part of that HTML tag. So we're getting the image tag. We're saying the source is the countryflags.io API. Then what we're doing is we're passing in the country code column that we just saw in our table. So for each row, this column will calculate what we just saw on the left plus the country code. And then what we're doing is we're passing in the rest of what the API needs. So we're asking for a flat flag, and it's a 24 pixel flag. And what happens then, if we just add that column in so we can see it more easily, we get something like this. So for each country code, for Canada, we get an HTML tag that we create from our data that's got the country flags IO URL in it, with Canada, with France, with the US for each row. And what that means is that if we were to drag I already have it pre-canned, but we'll do it, we'll actually show you. So if I drag that column in, then we get country flags. So what the visual is doing is it's taking that column, and if we just explore the data inside the visual, it's basically taking what we just saw in that table. Let's go down here. So for each row, we've got an HTML tag with the request for that image in it. And one thing that we saw before was that we could do raw HTML output. So in the properties pane, under content formatting, so there's a menu called content formatting with a few options. There's not many, but there's a few. We can click show raw HTML, and we can see that this matches this. So we can use this as a way of debugging our output. So with a column, it's quite straightforward because we can look at those in a table because they're already pre-calculated. Well, they're calculated when the model refreshes. So that's quite straightforward. That's an easy one. So we can start out simple. But what we can do is think about adding a total sales measure. So we've got a flag, but the flag, it's flag, right? Oh, there's Canada, there's the US, there's France. So we have a sales measure, and if we think about, there's no context, Power BI will just sum that up. So we know that the total sales for everything is like 4.5 billion. That's a lot of money. So what we can do, let's go up here now. Just double check the right measure. Okay. So we can build a measure, and we can open a paragraph. So P is for paragraph. We can type total sales as static text. We open a bold. We then add in a, whoops, I gotta get better at that, man. There we go.
No worries.
So then what we're going to do now is between the other bold tag and the closing bold tag and the closing paragraph tag, we're going to add a measure. So sales, that measure we calculated, we're going to format it. So one of the downsides is that if we're embedding a measure into something like this, the formatting from the data model isn't applied, which is a bit of a shame. So we can fix that by applying, using the DAX format function. So what we can then do is, if we one thing about this visual is it does have measure support now. So the output will look like this. So for sales, we've got total sales, and then the measure value formatted is embedded in that context for that value. So, that's total sales. And if we drag that in, it looks something like this. So just to reproduce that, because that's a here's one I prepared earlier kind of thing. If we just grab that measure and we drag it into values, and just drag that into a blank space, that's going to render the visual as HTML. So we've got an unbolded paragraph that says total sales, and then the sales value is dynamically injected based on what the measure calculates. Very exciting. So what happens now, if we add in a different level of grain, so if we drag the country code in, then the sales will obviously calculate, because it's a measure, it will calculate for that raw context. So now what we could do is think about the flags we created and think about the sales for each one. So now instead, we can rewrite our measure slightly. So I've been a little bit defensive here. This is one of my, it's a quirk I've developed as a developer, I guess, from a quality assurance perspective. So what I've done here is I've created a measure that, breaks things down into stages, because, since we've had variables in DAX, that's been really cool. So what we did before was we did calculate sales. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put that at the top and make that a variable. We're then going to use this function called selected value to grab the country flag. So what this is going to do is, if we've got a row context for country, then it's going to grab that country flag that we created and store it in a variable. It's E, not escape. Hotkeys for zoom it. E removes everything, escape zooms back out. Got to remember that.
Exactly.
Write it down 100 times.
We'll be a pro by the end of the webinar.
Yeah,
no worries.
I even put in practice before I started. That's the worrying.
There's no judgment here. I've done the same thing.
There's a zillion things to think about when you're talking. Multitasking is hard. I get it. So what we then do is we add another variable for has country. And what we do is we use the int function to check whether country flag got a value. So what I mean by that is if we had no context for country, then that variable above, country flag, wouldn't give us a selected value. So it would be empty. So what this is saying is it's just saying, if it's empty, we don't have a country. And then with these three down the bottom here, what we're doing is, and I've tried to make this as, it's hard to format this inside DAX, which is one of the bugbears, but it's what we have at the moment. We open a paragraph. What we then do is we run a switch statement. So what a switch does is it applies a number of conditions and checks them and applies an output. I'm murdering the description of that based on a condition. It's like an if with lots of clauses. It's pretty cool. So what we do is we just say whatever evaluates the true. So if has country is 0, so that means we don't have a country, then we put the text in total sales, all selected countries. If it does have a country, we display the country flag. And then we open up E, not escape.
Control E is erase. Yeah, Control or E of race.
Yeah.
You got it.
You can use Control Z as well. The bold tag starts. We put in the total sales that we calculated up here, and we close the bold and we close the paragraph. So what that looks like, I'll just use my pre-prepared bookmark. So with a context, with our country code, we've got our sales. And what the measure does is it puts in the country flag and it puts in the value. And if we take out, so many places to click. If we take the country code out, there's no context anymore. So what it's now doing is it's saying, I don't know what that is. So here's all the selected countries and, for what we've got. So we can actually have some control over what the output looks like using subDAX to, guide our output for users to make it more intuitive. What that actually looks like in the visual, I've added a slicer for funsies. That's a separate visual, obviously. We can't do slicing. We've got the country flag. We've got the value in bold. So in that visual is, now here we're going to introduce you to something called granularity. So the visual only allows a single column or measure. So if we take out that granularity, then it does what we saw above. It's got total sales, all selected countries. Now, we don't necessarily want to display the country in the visual. We want to use it as something to create row context. So this granularity field is there to give you a way of boofing up the number of rows. And then whatever you put in the values box will work out the value for each row that's in the data set. So what we have here, we can see it above, actually. I don't need to do the show as table. This is the same as this, basically. We don't have the country code or even country because they match the same level of grain. We could drag country in if we wanted. Just because we're using country code doesn't matter. So let's drag country in. If we drag country into granularity, then the visual will rework out that it has 5 rows and it needs to work out that country flag. And obviously, if we
this is this is really interesting that you're pointing this out. The granularity. This is a very similar concept to what we do with what you have here for your visual, but this is also a very charticulator. So the advanced charting functionality, it also gives you a granularity well. And I've always had a hard time explaining what this is, and I think I had a light bulb moment here when you were explaining this. It takes the grain of the data. If you're thinking like filter context, you're changing the filter context of the data. I was originally talking about a sum, which is a measure, and it'll aggregate over everything. It'll give you a single number always. And so the granularity is now dropping at a detail lower level that takes that same measure, same calculation, sum of total sales, and then says, okay, I'm going to do sum of total sales, and I'm going to break that out for each different filter criteria we have now for the country codes. That's really a good explanation. I really like that.
Thank you. And I think it's one of the key differences between, so Power BI's default behavior is to aggregate,
Yes.
which is what we want,
Yep.
really. Charticulator will, even if you have a row with the same, let's say we've got the country and we've got 5 records and each one is Canada. We've got Canada $10, Canada $20, Canada $30. Charticulator doesn't aggregate. It sees all the rows.
Yes.
So what we do with Charticulator visuals in Power BI is we have to simulate that grain so that the visual we built in Charticulator still works in Power
Yes.
BI. Otherwise we get some challenges. And it's something, to wit, another visual, it's something that the violin plot does as well, because the violin plot does all the aggregation inside the visual. We can't give it pre-aggregated values. We have to give all of the data we can so that it can calculate the distribution stats and everything else. So one of the things because my website is a little bit, I don't get so much on there now because I'm actually more active in the Power BI community forums rather than my website, but I do have an article on there about how the violin plot uses the sampling. We call it sampling in that one, but it's the same concept. So how you can visualize a table and see what it's doing. So there's quite a lengthy post on there, but it's worked through with a lot of diagrams and examples as to what that actually means. So we can talk about this a lot, but this field here is this field here is just a way of introducing extra context so that the things you want to do are kind of possible without putting them into the values bucket.
Is it the one when you're talking about the violin plot and the data grain sampling? Does that ring a bell?
That's correct. Yeah,
I've got it, and I'm going to put it in the chat window for you.
Yeah, so that does give a little nod to Charticulator in there, but also other visuals like the box plot. So I think Mac Software do one of those, and Jan-Peter Postuma does one. There's a few visuals that, and even the scatter plot core visual uses the concept of this because it needs to get every data point, and Power BI by default doesn't do that. So that's one of the challenges we've got there. Anyway, because the visual relies on what's fed into it, we can use slices with it just like any other visual. So if we wanted to just filter down and see Canada, we could do that. We could select France, we could multi-select. So we can sort of see things responding as we go. So that's just, I just thought I'd throw that in there. So if you cross highlight, the visual doesn't do cross highlighting, but it will filter. And maybe we'll show that in a. We've got another example for that. So that's building our simple kind of flag plus sales with some contextual awareness. Now, hyperlinks are an interesting one. So hyperlink is a link. You see a link in a web page, and you can click on it, and it takes you somewhere. So custom visuals, and I have a slide on this in a little more detail later, but custom visuals are very restricted on what they're allowed to do, and there's good reasons on that. But as developers, we can't just, we could theoretically, if we were so inclined, and I'm certainly not putting myself under this roof because my intentions are entirely honorable, I could create something in my visual that looked innocuous, but when somebody clicked on it, it could actually redirect them somewhere. So Power BI has some safeguards that, as custom visual developers, we can't just allow people to open links. We have to ask Power BI to open them for us. And what Power BI will do is we'll throw up a dialog box. So we saw it with the memes, but I'll just go over it here. So we have the visual here now has a measure that says visit PowerBI.Tips. That's the output we've got. And the HTML that generates is this A element, which is an anchor, and href is the location. So PowerBI.Tips, and then inside there is the text we want to display. So I can click on this, and Power BI, hopefully does that dialog box come up?
It does. It's there.
Screen sharing can sometimes be a bit funny with that. So Power BI will always, for us as custom visual developers, we have to ask Power BI, we want to open this link so that Power BI actually prompts to the user, which is, it gets in the way of the user experience a bit, but it's also very honest. So it's all consent-based. Every link is consent-based, which is good. You as a user that I'm not doing anything malicious. So I can click OK, and this will go to my web browser and open Power BI.Tips in a second. There we go. And yeah, Mike was at the Power BI quiz, so there we go.
That was yesterday, all over the web.
Yeah. We'll just jump back in. So this only supports, so with the web, we have what we call protocols. So this is HTTP, which is, most web pages or APIs. We can also do other stuff with protocols. We can actually run, so JavaScript, when people sort of talk about HTML and they say it's a programming language, it's not really a programming language, but it has a supporting tool called JavaScript, which you probably may have come across as well. I have to kind of cover all bases with, some people know a lot, some people don't know a lot. You can embed scripting code inside links, but Power BI doesn't allow us to do that. So what happens is that, I can mask that up as a legit hyperlink, but if I click on it, Power BI will say, no, sorry, it's malformed. And that's another way of preventing us as developers from being able to kind of lead you down a merry path of deception. So we can't actually do that. So by default, we don't allow this. And I've taken the stance with the visual. In here, there's a property that allowed us to do that. So under content formatting, there's an allow opening URLs property. So with that on, so you as a content creator have to decide to turn this on. If I now click on this, it doesn't do anything. So what that's actually doing is, you might think about, we're creating visuals and measures from scratch, but you could be using the HTML content visual to take data from another source, like say SharePoint or project or something like that, and try and render it. You're pulling it in and it's all a blob of HTML and you're trying to render it, and it might contain hyperlinks, and those hyperlinks may not work because we've taken I've taken the stance of, we want to be honest with our users. So if you want to enable it, you as a creator have to turn it on.
Totally makes sense.
But that was one of the things the previous visual was very inconsistent with, because this wasn't something that existed when that visual was built either. So we've had this recently added into the custom visuals SDK, which is quite cool. So what we can do though is we can sort of we can add a little bit of richness into our visual. So what we can do is, let me just find the right one, because I've got that's the bad one. Cool, there we go. So what we can do now is we can pretty much repeat the last measure, and it's not good practice to repeat code a lot, but again, we'll take you through the process. We've got the total sales, we've got the country flag. What I've done is I've taken out the context awareness just for brevity, because we're going to assume that the country is always used. So what I've done is I've created a country information URL column similar to the flag, and if we go into here. Come on, man. Where are you? Is it that one? Nope. Where did I put it? This is fun. One of those moments. Is it up here? Is it down there?
Which field were you looking for? Country again?
I'm looking for country information URL. Demographic country information URL. Let's just type it in. Let's use the tools we've got. There we go. I don't know where that went, but tried to organize everything nicely.
So it only works so well, right? There we go.
Always go live. So this is another calculated column, and what I've done is I've just taken the Wikipedia English page and I've just buffed the country name onto it. So what this will do is it will render something that looks like this, but it will be a Wikipedia link to whatever's in the country column. So let's just pull that up. And this looks fairly innocuous. So what we'll do is we'll just generate the HTML. Actually, yeah, we'll do that. What this does here, this is a little tricky to read, but it creates that link. So we've got Canada, we've got France. And then what I've done is I've just put a little title attribute in here. And what title is, it's just a way of displaying a very basic tooltip. It's one of the HTML standards. And I've just put click me to view the Wikipedia entry. So there's, it's not a great visual cue, but as visual cues go, it's very simple. And I've got my allow opening URLs on. So if I hover over Canada, I've got a little,
interesting
little tooltip that comes up. It says click me to view the Wikipedia entry. And I could, if I was so inclined, I could put code into my DAX to tweak the tooltip. So I could say, click me to view the Wikipedia entry for Canada, or
nice,
Canadians rule, or whatever we want to do, whoever we're aligned with. But if we click this and we've got the links enabled, we get prompted to say we can navigate to the Canada article. And if I click on this, then it's going to load the Canada article, and we can learn about Canada.
And when you hit that link, it's going to the default browser or whatever machine you're on. So
yes, it is.
If you're on a machine that uses Chrome as a default, it'll drop you right into Chrome. And in yours, it looks like you're using Edge, correct?
I'm using Edge for this presentation because my Firefox is my browser of choice at the moment. But I have to support all browsers. So I have a gazillion browsers installed on my system. But because Firefox is full of tabs that are, there's too many development articles and so many debug windows for custom visuals open,
I get it.
It's a bit of a mess.
I get it.
So I've pared it down to just use Edge for the moment. And of course, I use Edge all the time, obviously.
Yes, me too. Same.
Edge is, actually, the new Edge is quite good. And the old one was all right as well. I shouldn't. Do you know what? I'm just going to stop digging my hole. Edge is great, kids. So yeah, so what we can do is we can just apply it. It looks the same, but we get a little bit more richness. So we can do that. We can do heaps more, and I can spend forever on this because the level of creativity you have is almost as infinite as your desires with this stuff. So I'm just going to jump across to something because I want to try and cover a number of bases for people that may be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Let's give you some ideas about what you could aim for.
Oh, I got it.
So I got
a quick question for you. So another Daniel who's watching, he was looking at how you're embedding things, especially with some of the ref links. He was asking, is there a way for you to embed an iframe such that you could embed something like a multimedia content, like a video or like a video link or some kind of video interplay that would go inside the HTML?
The short answer is it depends. Okay. So I actually have a slide on this a little bit more at the end because there are some limitations. What I would suggest is if Daniel's okay, I will revisit this after that because I'm not going to demonstrate that concept, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges we have with that, and then we can revisit that. So stay tuned and please ask more questions as that happens. Good. So we'll talk about SVG. So I don't know if you've heard of SVG, scalable vector graphics. It's a way of embedding shapes and various other things inside a special, for lack of a better word, canvas inside a web browser. So if you've seen, bar charts, let's take that out so I can actually use a measure. If you've seen if we put sales in and country into a bar chart, these are nice rich outputs, right? This is a rectangle. This is a shape, and this is SVG. Actually, this is a text SVG element. So what these visuals are, there's like a hopefully, you can inspect this stuff yourself. It's not telling tales out of school, but you can, there's basically a box inside this Power BI visual that says this is a SVG container. And inside this are a bunch of shapes that I'm going to bind to my data. So some of these shapes happen to be text. Some of them happen to be rectangles. There's some lines with dots and a few other things. It obviously gets a lot more sophisticated because there's some very complex stuff going on in here, but we can start to leverage some of this functionality to do something a little cooler. So this is not going to be very exciting. Believe it or not, there's a visual here. And we've added an SVG canvas to it. And this is the code that it produces. So I've said, create a canvas that's 75 pixels high and 500 wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change it slightly so we can see it. And what I've done now is this is a visible container. And all I've done is I've changed the measure so that we've got a border. So we've just put a border around it so we can see what it is. So this is a container. And in this container, we will put stuff to do something richer. Now, we just saw a rectangle with the bar chart. And what I've done now instead is in this canvas, so I've taken the border out. Let me just jump there. I've taken the border out. But what I've done now is I've put a rectangle inside it, and that is the same width and height. And I've given it a blue fill. So we've now got a rectangle that spans that whole SVG container, and it takes up its whole width. That's very, very lovely. But what we can do with the visual is we can actually inject things into here to start creating data-bound shapes and measures. So, if we start with something very similar to what we had before, we've got the country, we've got the sales, and I've got something called all sales here. So, that's a standard measure that, just does a calculate over sales and gives us everything. So for each row, we can see that we've got how many sales, what the sales are for Canada, and how much the total sales are. And obviously these match up. So maybe you can see where I'm going. So what I can do here now is I can wire up something, and this is we're getting to the end here because it's kind of good to tease what we're doing. We've got a rectangle here it's in gray because it's a little more subtle. It's nice. And this uses the whole width. And over here is the HTML that gets generated. So it's the same SVG container. What we've done now is the rectangle has the same width, the same height, and it's got a fill color. And that's basically the same as the one above, which is not very exciting. But if we open up the measure, that's the wrong measure. If we open up the right measure, you got to remember to click on a visual so that the right measure is ticked in the properties pane.
Exactly.
It's a little bit more sophisticated. So if we just zoom in on the DAX there, we've created variables because it's nice to abstract this stuff away, because if we want to change these, we can do them at the top rather than down here somewhere, and we can reuse them. So I've got a 500 pixel container and a 75 pixel high container. And what I've done is I've created a little variable called sales percent. And what that's going to do is just divide the current row context sales by the total sales. And then I'm going to use that percentage to calculate a width for that rectangle against the width that we've set for the container. And then instead of just arbitrarily adding an SVG, I'm passing the height and the width in. And I've just got a border on there. And then I'm putting a rectangle inside, and that's now going to use the sales width. So that sales width, remember, is a percentage. And it's going to use the same height, and it's got a fill color on it. So what that actually means is if we've got this table here, if we click Canada, we can now partially shade the rectangle based on, it's using a certain portion. So what we can see now is the width has changed to 107.57 because that's the percentage of 500 that Canada's sales represents. And if we click the US, that will change a little bit. If we multi-select, we can build almost like a little gauge. Out of total sales, what does the current selection represent? And each time we click, we can see the width changes because that's being computed by the measure. So it's working out the percentage of sales against the percentage of the width, and we get something that's like a little gauge. So this is quite a simple implementation of taking a simple shape and binding the data to an attribute of it. And we click around and we see stuff happen. It's not too informative. So what we'll do is we'll just take it a little bit further. So we've used some of these concepts before. This shouldn't be too crazy, but text in SVG is a little bit different. So this is producing something a little more richer. We've got our SVG still. We've got a rectangle, which is the same. And what I've done is there are special elements called text. So they're not like we saw P elements and span elements. They're regular HTML. So inside an SVG container, we have to use a text element. And we have special attributes. So text anchor puts it in the center. Dominant baseline vertically aligns it based on the X and Y coordinates. So we have to tell SVG where to position things. If we don't supply X and Y, it puts them at the 0, 0. So if you think about a Cartesian chart, like a XY chart, it's kind of the same thing. We have to take an element and position it. Think of that. Think of this whole thing as an XY chart. And we've put it exactly in the middle. And what we've got now is we've got total sales and a percentage.
Nice.
So similar concept. If we click on Canada, it calculates the sales and how much of percentage it is, 22%.
This is getting me really geeked now. Like, this is really exciting. Like, the fact that you have so much flexibility
17.
now. Like, if you can dream it up in SVG, you basically can make it happen now.
This is what we, scripting and complicated programming stuff aside, this is essentially what the Power BI visuals do. Most people who develop Power BI visuals use SVG to build, and they have libraries that help them, but it's all built out of shapes.
Sure.
It's shapes all the way down.
Yeah.
So if we take a look at that measure, we haven't done much different. We've just added a bit extra in. So all we've really done is just extended it slightly. So we've got, our sales percent is still there. We've created a percent formatted, which does a similar thing to sales. We format the value as a percentage. And the only real difference is we have this text anchor, text element with a text anchor that puts it in the middle, calculates the X coordinate based on the width and the height, and the Y coordinate based on the height. And then inside that, it puts the total sales and the percentage that it works out. So it's a very, very simple, but
so cool.
starting to get powerful little visual, and this doesn't take a lot of work. So there's a lot of, if you're not familiar with these technologies, there's a fair bit of learning to do, but there's some really good resources on that. Now, if you want to get really crazy,
here we go. Let's go. Let's get crazy.
It's not too crazy. This is appropriated from a very, very talented MVP called David Eldersveld. He pushes the boundary of so much stuff inside Power BI, and he originally did some really cool stuff with the old HTML viewer. And I've been really excited to see what he's been doing with this one, actually, because now we've got measures. His creativity stuff is going crazy, which is amazing. He's doing some great stuff. Anyway, stop gushing about David. What we want to do now is use some more complicated DAX to build. This is a slicer, so let's just take this out. This is not part of the visual. We're going to build something that's you're familiar with sparklines, presumably. Hopefully you are if you're in the BI and data viz game. We're going to build a visual that has the same output, but puts a sparkline in next to each one. And for consistency, because the measures are different values, I've just put in it's called a table element around each row, just to keep all the spacing consistent. But what this is going to do is similar thing we've done before, but it's going to whack in a whole bunch of data in a line over time. And if we click on, because we've got that filtering ability, we can click on a series and we get updates. So this is kind of what we're doing. I'm not going to dive. I'm going to be tempted to, but I'm going to try and be good. Mike, you might just need to keep me grounded on this one. So we've built with this one. There's a lot going on. So what I've done is I've taken the approach of before we were putting values into DAX. What I've done this time is I've been a little bit better, and I've broken down the problem. So let's collapse that because that's the wrong slide. So Power BI, the PowerPoint of data. This is the first time I've really tried to do everything inside desktop and not jump out of PowerPoint into Power BI. It's been quite good.
I commend you for this, because this is a sticky point that I have. I really dislike the analogy of Power BI and it's the PowerPoint of data, because I just can't stand PowerPoint. It drives me absolutely bonkers. I hate PowerPoint slides. There's too much customization. We spend so much time customizing and not enough time actually building content for it. It drives me bonkers. But I'm with you. And kudos on trying to use Power BI Desktop. All my presentations are pretty much 100% slide by slide, all in Power BI Desktop. And I feel like if I'm going to learn Power BI Desktop, I better just get ultra good at it by just doing everything in it as much as I can. So kudos on you. That's awesome. Good move.
It's been fun. I will try and do more of this because once you got the bookmarks worked out, it's just so easy to click
Yes.
through. And anyway, we all know we like Power BI. Okay, so the approach we've got is if we use the table example, and this is often how this is a great way that Marco Russo and I built Alberto. I should have taken a drink. Alberto Ferrari break down the concept of context. So what we'll do is to illustrate what we're trying to figure out. Here's a table of some of the stuff we need. So with a Sparkline, for everything to be consistent, we need to think about the minimum date and the maximum date. So what we've done is we've got a measure that works out for the current row context. If we look at all of the sales, so let's just pull that up. Max and min are both very similar. We just get a min and a max because that's the context we have. So they're fairly straightforward. So for the current context, the minimum and maximum date spans from September to December. And if we change that to 2013, it will say it's the 1st September to end of December. Well, start of December, because we're using the start of the month. Anyway, I digress. We do a similar thing with sales. So what we need to do is for the period, work out what the lowest value was and the highest value. And we're going to use these to work out where the line chart goes. So we can see here for Canada, minimum sales was 32 million, nearly 33 million. And maximum was 54. So we now know what the lowest and highest values are. So we know that within our container, we've got to work with this. Next thing we do is I worked on this concept of instead of, because we've got to have a couple of measures to do this, configuring it up. So what I did was I built a little table called Sparkline Config. So I've got the viewbox width. So the viewbox is the area that we're looking at. The height, so this wants to make a 175 by, oops, let me zoom that in, sorry, 175 by 20 box. And what I actually want is, I don't want the Sparkline to use the whole box because if we do, it might clip the shape and not look so good. So when we talk about clipping, that's like the top of the box. The line might just hit the top, but because there's some width around the line, it kind of clips it and it doesn't look so good. So I'm just going to use 90% of the box just to give it a nice framing. The stroke width, which is the width of the line, and the color, which will be the color of the line. So what I've done is I've put this into a table, and I've created measures. So let's just pull those up.
This is really cool.
And
because I've noticed this on other SVG things that you can do. There's some weird formatting things that you can kind of get. And this is seeming to get around some of those issues. I really like this.
So these are just similar things we did for the flags, right? So stroke width is just selected value, stroke width. So all it's doing is just getting, because the table itself, I don't know if many people know about this. It's quite a common thing is to use a detached table. So because this table has no relationships to any of the tables, it's just a table that, will always have the right context. So all we're saying is just grab the value out of the box. We don't, we've got one row. We don't really have it filtered by anything. So it's fine. So that's just going to get those values out. And then what I'm going to do, let's put that in. So I've got my viewbox height, my viewbox width, and my percentage. So these are just nicely formatted so that, I'm very pedantic about my data models. Everything has to look right. So we've now got these measures for this context, and they're the same because it's a single row. The next thing we want to think about is breaking down the visual into two parts. We've got the Sparkline, and we've obviously got the rest of it. So what I'm going to do first is create a measure called Sparkline coordinates. So what I've got to do, and this is where it gets a little bit, whoa, but bear with me. So we've got, we're grabbing the variables. So these are just the measures for the current row context. That's exactly the same as we saw for the table. So we're getting the minimum, maximum date. We're getting the minimum and maximum sales values. We're getting the width of the box we want to use. So the whole width. We've got the scale factor, which is that 90% frame. Then what we need to do is work out the height of the Sparkline. So that's that 90% calculation. So by adding that configuration table, I could go and use Power Query to just change that. anytime I like, reload my data, and this thing will just adapt. And you could go beyond that and have measures that do this stuff. If you want to go really crazy with what if parameters and attach them to this, you can go crazy, but I'm just trying not to get ahead of myself. And then the magic really happens with this bit here. So variables can return tables, which is really handy when you're building a measure. So we can use this add columns call, and we summarize the financials table. And what we do is, it's hard to kind of show you the interim stages, so we'll just get to the output in a minute. But for each row, we're going to create a column called X and a column called Y. And we're going to calculate for each row its X position based on the number, where it is and what date it is, and how far away it is from the end date and the minimum date. So what that does is that basically turns the current date value for the row context into an X value, just like on a chart.
Like an index on the X axis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, we can zoom with the scroll bar. That's a scroll wheel. That's a new one. Learning about Zoom It. So, and the Y value kind of has the same principle. So we just simply say, out of the current sales, where is it in the the minimum and maximum that we've calculated? So how far along that spectrum is it? And that gives us the Y value. So in memory, while this is working out, we get a little table with X and Y values. And what we then do is we use this concatenate X function here to create. So what concatenate X does is it will squash a table down into a single row, for lack of a better word, and we can separate. The way SVG works is we need to separate the X and Y. It's kind of intuitive to. It's not like a CSV, which is kind of annoying if you're analogous to it. With the CSV file, values are separated with commas. With SVG coordinates, the X and Y values for each point are separated with a comma, and then we use a space to denote the next point. So between the X and the Y values, we put a comma, and then we put a space so that the next value in the data set gets added on, and it kind of gets all squashed together. And then we just return that. So what that looks like, because it's easier to see it, is I have a final table, which shows how that works out. And because I've put it down to 2013, we get less data points, so it's easier to figure out. So what that means is for the first row, for the first month, we get 018, so that's X0, Y18, X50, let me use that the right one, X51, Y0, 105, 3. And these are all the percentages based off date and value for those min and maxes that we worked out. If I click 2014, then we get a different set of values because we've got the 12 months in 2014. So we now get a different set of points. So what that does is creates this wonderful tapestry of HTML, which we don't need to worry too much about. But if we click, we can see the HTML changing because of the data that's being fed into it. So I won't sort of dwell too much on the details in here because we can have a look at that another time. But we can see that the numbers will change based on that. So each one of these here is a point in this line. And to understand how that actually looks, because we haven't talked about the calculation, this measure here pulls it all together. So we use a lot of what we used before, sales, country flag. Those measures we used for the view box width and height because we need those to build the canvas that we put the line in. So these things are all the same things from those tables. We then have the lines. So we just grab the line straight out of that measure. So that measure works as a staging value as well. We pre-calculate the line coordinates, and then we just pull them in. So context is all key here, which is really nice. It all just works. That's one of the nice things about Power BI. You've got that row context, and the measure just works it out, and you just grab it and stick it in. And then all we then do is we create our HTML content down here. We create our SVG Canvas like we did before. We create a G element, and that's a different thing. So this is a group. That's a way in SVG. Think of it in Power BI as grouping a bunch of visuals together. You got a bunch of visuals, you want to move them around at the same time, you group them. This is the same thing with SVG. You can put a bunch of stuff inside it. So all we're doing now is putting in a polyline element. And a polyline is just a line with many points. So we pass in the color, the stroke width, and the line coordinates. And that just produces that line that we saw in the page. So when we jump out of that, Oh, you got to love that when you've got a really big measure. You just need to get
This is
find a
I
small
don't
thing.
know what goes on with that DAX window, but man, it drives me bonkers. I can't figure out how to work it. I can't. I want it to be small sometimes. I want it to be big, and then when it gets too big, I want to grab the corner of it and I want to drag it smaller, and it won't let me. And I'm just so frustrated by that.
It uses the same editor that Visual Studio Code uses, so it's quite a heavyweight thing, but it's very,
Ah,
very powerful. But you do have those weird usability
yeah, yeah, yeah.
problems. Anyway, I'm speaking out about development tools. Um, so that kind of sums up a basic kind of primer from kind of go to woe as to what you could do. But then there's so many things that somebody who's much more creative than me could do. But what I'm all interested in is giving them the tool to do it. What I will do is go back to the question that Daniel asked earlier. And I'm probably going to butcher this as well because this is taken from a much bigger presentation that I do about custom visuals in general. So I do a presentation about some of the misconceptions, but also some of the limits and abilities of custom visuals because a lot of people are wary of them. And so it's really more about just explaining what we can and can't do. So this is going to
Oh,
hopefully
perfect.
answer some stuff, but there's a lot more questions probably after this. Anyway, so if we think about Power BI, desktop or the service, um, it's the main window. It has the control over everything. It has a domain or an origin. When we think about the internet, it's hosted at PowerBI.com. So Power BI, hosted at PowerBI.com, knows it's Power BI, can tell other sites that it's Power BI. When we add a custom visual, Power BI imposes a set of restrictions on it, and it puts it inside an inline frame or an iframe. So Daniel asked about an iframe for embedding. A custom visual itself is an iframe of its own. So when we add a visual to Power BI, it creates a frame, and that frame is then sandboxed. So iframes have features called sandboxing, and the main window can strip privileges away. So with custom visuals now, most of us are very honorable people, but if we have unfettered access to a web page that an iframe is hosted inside, we can do some crazy stuff, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. And what Microsoft want to do and what Power BI wants to do, and quite rightly, by the
Yes.
way, is ensure that a custom visual doesn't break Power BI for everybody else. If you put a visual in a page and I write some code that doesn't perform well, that sandbox makes sure that the rest of Power BI doesn't basically crap out because of it. There's also some bad actor kind of stuff that you could do, and by removing some of those permissions, those risks are mitigated. So there's about 7 or 8 sandboxing attributes, and Power BI removes all of them but one. So one of the things it does, I'm sorry, just before I jump down to that, a custom visual as well, and this is a quick thing I'll put out there is custom visuals don't just reach in and grab data from the data model. You can't do that. So you tell Power BI what features your visual supports, and when you drag fields into the pane, Power BI builds a query and pushes that result to the visual. So we just don't go, hey, I know all the fields in your data model. Give me all the fields and measures, and I'm going to send them off somewhere. We can't do that. We just say, Power BI, here are the, if we click on, this is an HTML content visual. I've got 2 buckets here. And whatever goes in these buckets, you need to evaluate them. And when you give that to me, I will then do stuff with it. So that's the only access to data that custom visuals have. And there's other things that Power BI does, like the links that we just saw. We have to ask Power BI to do that for us. We just can't access those things. Tooltips, interactivity, it's all delegated to Power BI. So Power BI takes some things away, but gives us APIs to do things for the user. So one of the things Power BI does is it takes away the origin or domain of the custom visual. So if the custom visual is not at PowerBI.com, it actually gives it a null value, which we might know as blank when we see measure results. So what that basically means is, remember how to draw an arrow.
Oh, you're better than I very rarely do
Yeah.
arrows. Nice.
It's always remembering the end, which end you
Yeah,
start
yeah.
with. So PowerBI.com removes the domain from a custom visual. So a custom visual all of a sudden is it's on an island somewhere with no real country of origin. It's kind of it's like an airport. It's international waters. It doesn't really have a kind of a home. And this is a protection that Power BI employs to say, I don't want you doing stuff that might be shifty in my name. Because if I don't do that, it's going to look like it's coming from my website, and I don't want to be known for doing bad stuff. But it also means that we can't do things in some cases. So there's this thing called the internet, which you might have heard of. And what we might want to do with our visual, as Daniel asked, is we might want to embed content from another website. We have to communicate out to that website from the visual, which we can do. But external websites and browsers themselves, they have a kind of partnership. So firstly, when you do a request to another site, we have something called the same origin policy. So if PowerBI.com talks to itself and needs to do a request to get some data, that's okay, because it's PowerBI.com and PowerBI.com. They work together well. So anything that is the same domain, web browsers are like, yep, cool, you can have it because you're PowerBI.com. The custom visual is from nowhere, so it can't get anything from anywhere. So any website you want to talk to, it's not the same website. So that's immediately going to say, nope, sorry, can't do that. It then falls through to something called the cross-origin resource sharing policy. And that's entirely up to the website. So a website might say, yeah, I don't care. So if there's a public API, it might say, it doesn't matter where it comes from, it can have it. Something like YouTube, they have a rule that says, no, you can't, if you're from nowhere, you can't have my content. If you're from a known website, I will allow you my content. Because the visual has no website, no home, YouTube will just outright say, sorry, you can't do it. And the browser will reinforce that. So what it means is if you try and embed a web page, it's really up to the provider of the website. So it's not something that Power BI is specifically doing, but it is taking a permission away so that we can't do stuff without real transparency. And again, it's a policy that the website owner that you're trying to talk to enforces. So they have their decisions. And in these cases, that a good example would be YouTube says no, but Vimeo say yes. So if you wanted to take a Vimeo video and embed that using the code that they give you, they actually allow this cross-origin thing to happen, but YouTube doesn't.
Can I ask a question about that?
It's quite hard to. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so this is really interesting to me. So I've done a little bit of web development in my spare time, and so the CORS policy piece is kind of a tricky thing to understand. And this is, again, a really good explanation of what's happening about the cross-origin pieces of this. But my understanding also is there's and again, I don't want to go too much in the weeds here, but this is maybe more for my clarification or edification anyways. There's actually two kinds of custom visuals. There's certified custom visuals, and then there are non-certified custom visuals. So the non-certified is just kind of like, hey, I built the visual, I'm going to put it on the app source, it's just going to go through. And then you can actually get a little blue check mark with your custom visual and actually get it certified, which means you're actually, Microsoft is reviewing, and there's a person involved in that process, making sure that the custom visual is built in a way that says, Microsoft says, hey, this is not malicious. We're going to give you, and by doing that, you actually get a little bit of extra privileges by being certified. Does that sound right?
Yes and no. It's on the right track.
Okay.
So I'm fortunate that
you get to see that side of it.
Two of my other visuals are certified.
Yes.
Actually, I need to put this on the frequently asked questions because I get a lot of emails about HTML content.
Sure.
It won't be certified.
Yes.
Just in case anyone wants to know, it can't be certified.
Microsoft would not do it.
The reason being is that certified visuals are not allowed to access any external sources. It doesn't matter whether it's an image, a font, a whole web API, anything like that. So if they go through our code, they find anything that loads an external service. This is why a lot of mapping visuals aren't certified, because they load tiles from remote servers.
Yes.
That's just something they don't allow. Now, there are some debates over whether that's a good or a bad idea. I'm not going to get into that. But ultimately, you as a consumer can be rest assured that if you have a certified visual, it's not talking to any remote location. So this stuff doesn't happen that we're looking at on this slide here. HTML content, you can write code that loads images, with the flag thing we just did. We wouldn't be able to do that with a certified visual. We would have to package the flags into the visual itself so that they're all kept in the same
Gotcha.
room. So the privileges you get right now are, well, it's certified, obviously. So there are some security elements of Power BI tenant configuration. So, your admins can allow certified custom visuals because they've been reviewed and so on and so forth. They get exported to PowerPoint and PDFs, and they can appear in Teams and embeds in various other places. Yeah. At the minute, that's about it. But the certification is it's quite a valuable thing to have. It does stop a lot of questions. But having thought about, I had a couple of emails overnight about it. Hey, when are you going to certify this thing? I'll outright say now I can't
Yeah,
do it.
makes sense.
It's just not up to me, and I don't have any issue with that either
Yep.
because it's the author can do
Sure.
stuff. One thing I should point out, I do have a privacy policy with the visual. The code that I write doesn't do anything. It doesn't send anything anywhere, but the code you write can. So if you have ever any concerns about stuff being let out of that visual, talk to the author of the report.
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the issues we have. So going back to kind of does that answer
Yeah, it answered my question. Yeah, totally did.
I do often wander
And
off.
the only reason I kind of poke on those is one thing I would absolutely love to see inside Power BI reports for me is I'm a YouTube content creator, and so a lot of my content would be great to have videos just kind of hosted and inside there. So you and I may have to go back to the product team and have some deep conversations about how we can get a YouTube custom visual in here at some point. So we'll talk about that later.
But no, I mean, Discovery Eye, for instance, they use Vimeo specifically to embed videos because Vimeo allow it. If Vimeo changes that in the future, that's not really up to us. It's up to them. So the thing about cores is if you do any web development in any capacity, it's really important that you understand what it is. So there's a good document from Mozilla's web docs that explain it. I'm not going to dig into it, but it really, they do say everyone should read this article if you have involvement with web development. But this does explain what it is and digs into it a little bit more. So, I mean, we can talk about it till the cows come home, but we're getting a little bit, it's like you say, into the weeds for some people. But when you have a challenge like, oh, why can't I embed this site? It's the site saying, sorry, you can't do it. And it's a little bit of it. It's a little bit of, 6 of one and a half dozen the other. Power BI is saying, I'm stripping away the right for you to say you're from PowerBI.com because you might be doing shady stuff, and I don't want to be affiliated with that, which is, fair and reasonable. But on the other hand, the website is saying, well, I don't want to be involved with that either. So sorry. And that's just not something we can do anything about. So it's really tricky to qualify the answer with you can absolutely do this or that because it's really up to the provider that you're using.
Gotcha.
The other thing is there's a little quirk with Power BI Desktop. It doesn't render iframes, so you might need to test it in the service. So you might need to publish the report and test it. So the Vimeo example, it doesn't work in desktop, but it will work when you publish it to the service. And that's a technical thing that I haven't really dug into inside desktop, but it's probably just to how it's put together. So yeah, that kind of sums that up. But what I'd like to do, I mean, do we want to do a couple of questions, or if there's anything to talk about, or do you want me to just do a last little bit with the?
Yeah, I think.
It's going?
Discovery EI just showed up and said, "Awesome stuff. Thanks so much for taking the complex things and making them simple for us." So they say hello. Let me just scan a couple more questions here. The last kind of key question we had was the multimedia content and the cores question around YouTube videos. Someone else, the other Daniel, is asking about that, and I think that's about it for questions. So let's move on to the last little piece that you've got there.
Yeah, sure. So this was really this was kind of like a weekend project, which is kind of sad when you think about it. But I like this stuff. Do what you like. Putting this visual together was, it took me a while, but I could knock it out on a weekend and put it out into the marketplace. But I've been thinking a lot about it because obviously you start to use it, and we can see that doing HTML index is tricky to debug. It's a bit time consuming, and you got to hit the button and see what happens. So I've thought really hard about what we can do with this visual and where we can take it. So I can't leave it alone. I'm really excited.
So you're saying this is so let me preface this. This is a little bit of a preview of what's to come. Is that what you're kind of alluding to here, or is this?
Yes, I don't have an ETA because I keep moving the goalposts because I do stuff, keep getting more excited about it.
Okay.
But I live in a development environment, so coding tools and so on and so forth. So what I want to try and do is bring a little bit of that in. So what I'm going to do real quick is multitasking. There we go. So what we have here is two versions of the same visual. So we've got version 1, which is what we just saw, and this is the Sparkline example we just saw. So if we open this up, we can see that the data inside it is pretty much, we've got the granularity and we've got the HTML that we generated, and we wrote that as a measure in DAX. what I'm looking to do here with version 2, and this is, like I say, keep moving the goalposts, but it's okay enough to show without falling over. We get the very same output. The difference is that we have the values column, the values field now allows multiple values. So the goal of this is that it allows backwards compatibility. So we can still work as if we want to do DAX in HTML, HTML in DAX, we can. But if we want to use raw values, then this opens things up a bit. So if we open up, if we look at the data first, because I'm teasing away and teasing and teasing, the data for this visual is more conventional. We've got the country code, we've got the sales, and we've got those measures that we created, and we've got the coordinates. Custom visuals have, and you may have seen this with things like Infographic Designer or Power KPI Matrix, we actually have a capability that is called advanced editing. So we can click on the ellipsis, the visual header, and we now get a new option called edit. So we can click on this. And what I've done is we've got a contextual check that says, are we in this thing? And if we are, let's open up some more tools.
All right.
So at the
Michael's
minute,
transitioning to the smile thing. I gotta just this is why I'm so excited. So I had to transition to a video here. This is so cool. I'm so excited for this. I've been waiting the whole time to kind of get to this point in the presentation. You showed me this very early on, and I was like, oh my gosh, my mind is blown. This is so cool. So I'm super thrilled about this, and I'm so excited. So this is great. For those of you who've hung
this is
on, you are
encouraging.
in for a treat. That's for sure.
So yeah, this is for more of the power users.
Yes.
So what we've now got is we've got a little menu on the left here. And what we'll do is we'll expand this out. So what we can do instead of writing the HTML in DAX is we can actually write HTML inside this thing. So we've got a little editor with syntax highlighting. And what I'm doing at the minute is I'm just currently building an API for this. So this is where I'm getting held up, is I just want to make sure the experience for people that are a little more code savvy and those that aren't kind of get a good balance. So what we now do is, let me just collapse this down. And this is one thing the other visual couldn't do because we had to write something for every row. What we can do now is we can surround the whole output with stuff if we want. So, I can put like, hi there in the visual and click apply, and immediately the output on the right updates to show it. But you notice it's not for every row. So immediately we can start to, put things around. We write our content directly inside the visual. And what we've got is we've got a templating language. And what this is saying is for each row in the data set, this is now our template. Create a table row, create a table column. And instead of writing that country image thing for the flag index, let's put it directly into the code. Hopefully, let's just zoom that in a bit. Sorry, I just realized that's probably a bit small.
Yep, there we go.
Let's put it in the code and let's embed that measure value right in there. And then with this table column, we've given it a style from Cascading Style Sheet, which I'll show in just a moment. And then what I've started to do is, because we talked about that raw value problem, where you drag a measure in, you get a raw value. The way we've got it working is with backwards compatibility, and you don't want to use this advanced editing, you can just use the value as it is in Power BI, and it will appear as it should. But if you're going to get complicated, you have to format it yourself. So we're building in an API that lets us format a measure given what's in the data model, or if we wanted to, we could type in a custom one. So we could just type in like, dollar number billion. Oops. No, that's bad. We can, when we get it right, do that. And then we apply that, and instead we need another comma because that's millions. We can put a format string in that changes the output of that measure within the visual. So, and we can also, one thing we'll do is we'll open up cultures as well. So by default, it will use your language. So if you're in France, then it will format, decimals the right way, but we could override that if we wanted. So we're going to look at things like that. We put the height and the width for the SVG canvas in. We put the line in, and we just add the measures directly. So we get a much cleaner, simpler template, and we can live test it in this little window here. We can have a style sheet. So if anyone knows about cascading style sheets, we give people the ability to write styling. So we've got a class equal number, and we right align it. If we change that to left, we can left align it. We're trying to give people a little more control. over what they can do without having to get too into the data model. Because that's one of the challenges, is that you're kind of polluting your data model, for lack of a better description. So we're trying to figure that out. You can do the raw HTML just like you did before, but it's a little bit nicer to work with. We've put in line, we've pretty printed it so that it's easier to read. In that last one, it was all kind of squashed onto one line. You can now copy paste it, if you wanted to try it in a separate screen. There's all kinds of things we're working on. So I'm getting a little obsessed with it, but it'll be ready soon. The other thing I'm building in is conditional stuff. So let me just grab that. So if we want to do something simple like, for the sales amount, if we wanted to put in some styling, we could say if the sales are greater than, however many that is, it's a lot of numbers, format it green, else it's black. And let's just take that HTML off. This is more impactful. There we go. So there's all kinds of cool stuff we're looking to do, that we're going to hopefully have something really rich and powerful that allows you to do a lot more. I'm going to stop there.
You've got, oh my gosh. If I had an audio effect, I would throw in a big clapping and hey, that's super cool. The fact that you've scripted it all out and you thought of it as a scriptable language like this. Oh, it makes me super excited to see this. So I'm super pleased. Any way we can help support you with this. I was digging around your GitHub page as well, and while we're talking about it, I will straight up throw out a call there for your GitHub page. I believe there's a support me tag on your GitHub as well. Does that sound right?
Actually, yes, there is. So every visual I release, I do completely free of charge. They're open source, so they do come with the caveat that, they've supported in my free time. The challenge I have is that free time is free, and I do need to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So at the minute, I supplement a lot of my, fun time with doing work. And not that work isn't fun, because I love what I do. I get to work in my favorite space. I get to work in data and Power BI and do cool stuff. But
that's so cool.
These are vanity projects for me, and I think they're really powerful for people to be able to do their own thing. And that's really what I'm about. I want people to be able to have more control and more ability to do things. Okay. If you're a little bit more savvy, obviously there's huge benefits to the clicky, draggy, droppy thing. I think that's awesome. I think the low code stuff is fantastic. But I think if you just need a little bit more, what I'm keen on is trying to see if I can help people. And I'm really interested to see what people can do. That's the more exciting thing. I have a fairly, my imagination for code is good. My creativity for visualization is okay, but I think there's some amazingly talented people out there that if you give them enough stuff, they'll kind of blow you away.
I totally 100% agree with you. Our community is amazing. So I dropped in your sponsor me page. So hopefully we can buy you a couple of coffees, if nothing else, at least for this presentation. But go sponsor Daniel. Go throw some dollar bills at him so he can continue developing this incredible visual and finish this out for us. Really appreciate that. This is so cool. Is there any other kind of tricks you're hiding behind your sleeve here? Or is this kind of the final icing on the cake here?
I think I'm all out of tricks at the minute. It was a furious scramble yesterday because I've been ripping this thing. It was nearly ready to go, and then I thought about it a lot more, and I thought, now we can do more with it. So awesome. I've been like ripping it apart and building it back together furiously to make this date. So hopefully we'll do another session on that when it's ready. Spend a lot more time on it.
Yeah, for sure. We will definitely. We'll do another one for sure.
Yeah, no, I look forward to it. So, I think that's all I have for today, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you everyone who's been attending. Again, you're not going to wipe the smile off my face today. I'm so excited. You're just so happy that you're able to share this one. I'm very pleased you've gotten this far. Thank you very much for version 1 of the visual. Super pleased. A lot of fun being able to watch you kind of develop and build that one. And version 2 is going to be a huge win as well, I think. So definitely, we'll get you back on the horn when V2 gets officially released and you kind of get closer to release date. Please let me know. We'll hit up another blog and we'll do another video like this, and we can go. It's a two-parter, honestly. We can probably do a lightweight version, and then we can go like heavy and deep in the weeds here, so we can get people started here. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you guys for hanging around this late. As I know it's been a little bit longer of a webinar, but I think this was all excellent content, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. Daniel, thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we will talk again soon.
Love to. Thanks very much. Take care, everybody.
See ya. Thank you.
Cheers.